We're going to move on now to another huge story in our state. The U.S. Supreme Court heard a potentially momentous case this week out of Wisconsin. Democrats are challenging the maps that Republicans drew 6 years ago to determine legislative districts. The Democrats claim those maps gave the GOP an unfair advantage to the extent that it infringed on the voting rights of some of Wisconsin's citizens. Patrick Marley of the Journal Sentinel's Madison Bureau was in Washington, D.C. earlier this week for oral arguments before the U.S. Supreme Court, and I spoke with him about what he heard. So, Patrick, welcome to OnPolitics. A big case at the U.S. Supreme Court involving Wisconsin this week over redistricting. And as you reported, there appear to be deep divisions on this court, with the conservatives sort of on one side, as they often are, and the liberals on the other. That leaves Anthony Kennedy. Any sense of where Anthony Kennedy is on this case?
No, I'd say the one thing you could glean from the arguments was that it seems very clear that it's going to be a 5-4 decision. It's just with Kennedy as that tipping point, it's just not certain which side he's going to come down on. I would say that it appeared that the arguments went a little better for Democrats than Republicans in terms of the types of questions that Kennedy was asking. But I also don't think that he really tipped his hands too much, so that you could really see him going either way on this issue.
Once again, the power center of the court. So what are the political implications of this case, especially for Wisconsin Democrats?
The implications are huge. The Democrats have been out of power for 7 years in Wisconsin. These maps are very bad for them, and it seems almost impossible to believe that they could win control of either chamber under these maps. This case could, if they were to prevail here, a new set of maps would have to be drawn. Those maps would be more neutral. It wouldn't guarantee that they would be able to take a majority. In fact, Republicans would probably still have somewhat of an edge under quote-unquote fair maps, but it would give them a shot at, they'd at least have a fighting chance, which they don't have at this point.
What about nationally?
Again, stakes are huge there. I mean, if this case were to go in favor of the Democrats, then the rules would be reset for all maps. After the 2020 census, they would have to be drawn in a new way where either party would have limits on how far they could go with drawing maps to help their party. So it would have a big change there. And conversely, if the state were to win and the Republican maps were upheld in Wisconsin, that likely would make clear that parties can go as far as they want, and it would give sort of a clear signal to Republicans and Democrats around the country that when they have a one-party control of a state, that they can draw maps that sort of lock them into a majority.
So Chief Justice John Roberts seemed to be arguing that one of the outcomes of the case could be, if the Democrats win, sort of a nightmare in the terms of the amount of work that might come before the courts. Do I have that right?
Yes, that's definitely his view. So most cases that go to the Supreme Court or they get appealed to the Supreme Court, the court has a chance to decide whether they want to take it or not take it, and they take a very tiny percentage of those cases. Redistricting cases are different. Under federal law, any appeal must be decided by the Supreme Court. So they have to weigh in. Now, oftentimes they don't have arguments like they are in the Wisconsin case, and they just decide it on briefs, and often with a one-line order that says, the lower court decision is upheld or reversed. His concern is that if the court says, yes, partisans can go too far in drawing these maps, that these cases are going to come up time and again to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's going to have to decide, in this case, do the Democrats win or do the Republicans win, and that the public is not going to understand any nuances behind any tests that they do to measure partisanship, and the public's perception is going to be the court is in the bag for party X or party Y.
Yeah, so a real concern there. And he's often been concerned about the image of the court. So Kennedy has signaled in the past that he'd be open at least to the legal argument that partisan redistricting runs counter to the U.S. Constitution. Is that correct?
Yes. So Kennedy's position in past cases has been you can go too far, and that it can violate the Constitution when you draw these one-sided maps, but he has never seen a way to adequately measure it. And he has sort of asked in a 2004 case that people come up with new ways to figure this out so that courts could manage these types of cases. The issue here is this new test, this efficiency gap test they call it, a good way to measure this that courts can handle? Kennedy might say yes. Kennedy could also say, you know, we've tried all this time to figure out, and this is just not an area that the courts are to intervene. It's something that the politicians have to sort out.
All right. So, Patrick, when might we expect a decision in this case? Is it possible that they would decide this earlier because of the impact on the elections?
So the head of the State Elections Commission has asked for that very thing, not saying how he wants the case to go, but that he just wants to know what the maps are early on so that the state can efficiently run its elections. But the fact of the matter is the court could rule as late as June on this. That would create great difficulty with setting new maps if they were to rule that late. We really don't know what the court would do.
All right. Patrick, Marley, and Madison, thanks so much.
Thank you, David.